This episode is brought to you by Toad Ranch. Toad Ranch specializes in designing and building premium reptile habitats for everyone from dedicated hobbyists to zoos, nature centers, and other professional institutions. Known for their exceptional craftsmanship, fully customizable design, and unmatched attention to detail, Toad Ranch has become one of the most trusted names in reptile enclosures. Whether you're housing a single pet or an entire collection, Toad Ranch creates habitats that are built to last and designed with both keeper and animal in mind. And for listeners of the podcast, Toad Ranch is offering a special discount for a limited time. Use promo code SSP15 at checkout to receive 15% off all destination backgrounds and baskin hides. If you've been thinking of upgrading your enclosure, now is the perfect time to do it. That's SSP15 for 15% off destination backgrounds and baskin hides only at Toad Ranch. Hi, and welcome into the Scutes and Scales Podcast, our very first episode, so pilot, if you will. My name is Channing Guest, and joined with me is Luke Daniel.
That's right. I'm the wildlife specialist over at Georgia Southern University, where I work with a variety of reptiles and birds of prey, mainly birds of prey and snakes, as well as keep a couple of reptiles around the house, such as Japanese rat snakes and Mexican indigo snakes.
Absolutely. And my name, like I said, I'm Channing, and I have a private collection of several animals at home, as well as I am a biologist at Newport Aquarium, an AZA aquarium up in northern Kentucky. But the thing is, this podcast really isn't about me and Luke. We did want to introduce you guys just so you can know a little more about us, and this episode will be about kind of getting to know the host. But ultimately, this podcast is going to be about more of getting to know other people and getting those stories that me and Luke enjoy. So we actually do have two separate themes that we plan to go over with this podcast. And we want to introduce you guys to those two themes. The first theme is going to be more similar to tonight's episode that you guys are listening to now, and that is going to be called Scutes and Scales Talkin' Shop. So kind of the whole premise behind this was me and Luke wanted to introduce you guys to this feeling of having conversations with these reptile vendors and conservationists and big names in the hobby that the average listener may not get the chance to meet. You know, we look at these things like International Herpetological Symposium, Colubrid Fest, those sorts of fun events. Those are great opportunities to get to know the people behind the brand. And not everybody can afford to go to things like that. So we kind of wanted to give you guys the opportunity to get to know those people. And that's what Talkin' Shop is all about, sharing those fun stories, talking about little nuanced things in your reptile care. So we plan to have lots of big names on from the hobby and interview them and see what their thoughts are on all sorts of fun topics and kind of break the mold of the normal reptile podcast. It won't be strictly husbandry based. We will probably talk about some husbandry and keeping aspects, I'm sure. But we don't plan on just talking about exclusively how to take care of animals. Plenty of podcasts already cover those things incredibly well. So we wanted to kind of do something that was a little bit more unique and done a little bit less often. But that is not the only theme we have. We do have another one, which I think is a little bit different.
That's right. And that's what we're going to call our Scutes and Scales Legend Series. This is where we're almost going to have almost like a reptile true crime series going on. We're going to take all these stories involving reptiles from all around the world, these tall tales, if you will, and we're going to kind of break them down, separate the fact from the fiction, see what's going on in them, and just see if there's really, a grain of salt or a grain of truth to these stories.
Absolutely. And that one I think excites me a good bit because that to me, Luke, is what strikes me a lot more about our normal conversations. I know like me and you've been lifelong friends and we've gone through a lot of these things just in road trips and things like that. So it's interesting getting to share these stories and kind of do a more professional and suspenseful format and put that craftsmanship into it. Especially when you look at some of the craziness of these stories. Some of them are going to be obviously fake from the jump. You're going to see the title, you're going to read it, and you're going to know this isn't real. But other ones, they may have some validity to them. And so that's one of those things I think is really interesting. And Luke, why don't you share a little bit of like the idea of the breaking down the stories?
Absolutely. I think a big inspiration to me personally for this part was from the Mr. Ballin podcast with a lot of his true crime and kind of campfire stories that he does there. And we want to do something similar to that, but different and make it just solely about reptiles, which I'm, like you, pretty excited for there.
Yeah. And so the whole idea is basically The episodes will start with a nice suspenseful storytelling aspect. We'll kind of go into breaking down the actual events that are claimed to be true. Whether or not they are, we'll find out hopefully in the episode. But we'll break down the events and talk about all that, and then we'll kind of go into painting a picture of how could we feasibly make this happen. Like, let's say it's a snake eating a person. Might be a hint into the first episode coming up. But we're going to say it's a snake eating a person. We know that those things do happen, but they're incredibly rare. So how can we paint a picture of how a snake could actually eat a person? Well, we'll break that down and try and make it seem logically possible. And then we'll go into, okay, what's the reality? The reality is these things can happen, but they happen incredibly rarely. And then we'll kind of break down from there, and we'll give these stories kind of almost a reality perspective from our end, and just continue to break down those stories to the point of our decision of, do we think this thing is real? Do we think these things actually happen? So that's what we're looking forward to with that Legends series. And we say that these series are original, and they to an extent are, at least to the reptile hobby. People do very similar things in media, and we've taken lots of inspiration from all over the place. I know for me personally, there's a lot of podcasts and a lot of people who've inspired me. But Luke, you have a lot of people who have inspired you as well. So why don't you introduce us to some of those people?
Of course, number one would have to be my parents. My dad especially got me into reptiles as a toddler. We'd, stop on the side of the road anytime we saw a rat snake or a box turtle crossing and make sure it got safely across. He also had a couple of reptiles in the house that was fun to have around. And then, of course, watching things on TV like The Crocodile Hunter and Jeff Corwin were big ones for me growing up there. But yeah, we've also, with my parents, they were able to give me a lot of opportunities growing up, let me volunteer at a lot of different places to give me just a wide experience with a lot of different types of animals. And that's something that's really helped kind of drive that passion for me still today.
And I know one of the things, Luke, that me and you have talked about a lot is just our experiences, even with each other, being the continuing inspiration. I know, like, getting into hanging out with you and looking into reptile stuff at a young age is part of the things that have fueled me moving on even to today. Just having that the conversational relationship with you, and that's really something that we hope we can capture in this podcast to portray to the listener. Is this isn't just a back and forth thing of you take a turn and we take a turn to be structured like that, but we're really looking to have this be something where you get to be a fly on the wall and just kind of listen to the conversation. So once we get through this question of like inspirational figures, that's kind of what we're aiming for. And we're going to try and kind of take a seat back and just have that side to side conversation, let you listen into it and see what you guys think about that. So my number one inspiration to actually starting a podcast is Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. They do an incredible job, and there was lots of things I've heard them talk about them, like, oh, I'd love to hear more about that when it gets into personal conversations, or lots of cool stories they shared, and I like that. So I was like, hey, why don't me and Luke kind of came together and we were talking about, why don't we do something that's capturing those stories that a lot of other podcasts don't have time to go down. And so that was a big inspiration to starting this specifically. Two other inspirations that were really big is Philip Leitz at Arids Only. The way that he carries himself and presents media is something that I really think is inspirational to me. I've reading a lot of his posts and seeing the way he takes care of animals. It's a lot of his stuff is based so uniquely around animals' natural history, but capturing that in his own personal way. There's somebody that I would love to get to know better, and maybe one day we'll be able to have him on the podcast, get to interview him and ask him some of those questions. But seeing the way that he cares for animals was kind of one of those things of like, there's all these unique people out there who do all sorts of cool things, and there's no way to get to meet them all yourself. So if you can have sort of a database to go through and get to hear some of these people talk about things and pull that curtain back, it'd be kind of neat to do. Another person who is a huge inspiration to me, especially at a young age, there's a fella by the name of Stan Lake. You can find him on Instagram at Catching Creation. Huge inspiration to me. I met him when I was 13 years old, or more specifically, I discovered him when I was 13 years old, just scrolling through YouTube, and stumbled across some of his videos and was commenting on his videos. And then he actually replied to my comments and talked to me about reptiles, me being some kid. And somehow or another, we ended up convincing him to come down to Georgia and visit my family and do some educational shows while he was down there. And we did some herping, even recorded a YouTube video together with me being just some kid who thought he knew a lot about reptiles but really didn't. So that whole thing just was really inspiring to me to keep going, having someone take that time to pour into me when they really didn't have to. And the funny thing is, Luke, we actually do have a pretty funny story specifically about the Catch and Creation YouTube videos that me and you figured out later on.
About their YouTube videos.
Yeah, do you not remember this?
No.
No,
Oh wait,
I
do now.
Yeah,
I remember I was actually homesick in bed and was scrolling through some YouTube videos about snakes, as one does when they're homesick, I suppose, and watched this little feature from this channel called Catch and Creation that I had never really heard of, but seemed neat, about an Eastern king snake. And I'm watching this kid hold this Eastern king snake while Mr. Stan Lake presents it there. I'm like, this kid looks really familiar. And at the end there, he was, of course, wanted to thank his buddy Channing for finding and catching that Eastern king snake for him. I was like, there's no way. That's a fun little memory jog there. No, I had forgotten about that.
Yeah, that story stuck with me because I remember it being one of those things. After a few years, I forgot that story even existed. And then you were like, yeah, I just saw you on YouTube randomly with this guy named Stan Lake. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot we did film that YouTube video together. And, not that I know that Stan Lake will hear this, but if he does happen to listen to this episode, this is just a reminder that I found 2 snakes that day at 13 years old and you didn't find any. So you got shown up by a 13-year-old who had no idea what he was doing. So not to say I stole the show on the YouTube video either, but I was remembered for that appearance, even though I'm pretty sure I just stood there awkwardly, but that's beside the point. So, but yeah, that just really cool figures that have led us to the point where we're at, and hoping that we can potentially be inspiring to other people, not necessarily by our own standard, but just by allowing you to have access to other popular people in media and hopefully cool stories that may inspire you to look into stuff like that yourself. So the thing is, these stories all happened after we got into reptiles. Everybody goes into their stories of how they got into them, and some people have pretty unique stories. I don't feel like mine necessarily is super unique, but Luke, why don't you share your background and kind of what got you into reptiles initially?
Well, I guess I touched on it a little bit earlier, but I mean, some of my earliest memories were running out of the car to go catch a box turtle, a rat snake. King snake was always a fun find, since we were talking about that. A kind of prominent figure for me in that area, kind of like Stan Lake for you there, was a fellow that went by the name of Okefenokee Joe, who was a good bit into country
I've
music.
heard stories of this Okefenokee Joe.
He was pretty awesome. He's unfortunately not with us anymore, but he used to travel and do reptile programs all over the state of Georgia. I remember as a kid going to libraries and seeing his presentations on, I distinctly remember king snakes and cottonmouths were kind of the stands out during those programs to me. But yeah, that really inspired me to think I really want to work with animals one day. And so thankfully, I guess it works out for some, not for others. I feel very grateful to have been homeschooled, which opened up my schedule, made it very flexible to where I could, do school at night or in the afternoon, and also be able to have my own animals at the house to take care of, as well as be able to volunteer and work at different facilities where I got experience with all different kinds of animals. But one thing that really kind of kept me into it, and it's kind of a funny story here, is when I was 4 years old, I received a pet leopard gecko from my parents.
Nice.
If it was not for that leopard gecko, I don't know if I would still be as into reptiles and animals as I am today.
And sorry, pardon me for interrupting, but you still have this leopard gecko, don't you?
She's still around. She's still
around after all these years.
She's 21.
So she's 20. I'm about to say 21 years old.
21 years young. Yep. Dang. 21 years young.
So she can drink now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Nice.
Absolutely.
Nice.
So, that one, I feel like we all kind of deal with burnout and falling in and out of hobbies, whatever it may be that you like.
Absolutely.
But that was something prominent that just really, like a fishing rod kept reeling me back in every time I was dealing with burnout or something, was just having that leopard gecko throughout all the years. And then, just all the different wonderful experiences I got to have with those different jobs and volunteering at different places, and with you. If
Yeah.
it wasn't for you in the exact same way, I don't know if I would be as big into it as having a friend to kind of come alongside and, you
Yeah, I
know,
think we've definitely fed off of each other when it comes to this. Like when there's been those times of like, I don't know if I can do this. It's just it's so much, and taking care of like all these reptiles and doing all this work is just it's really getting to me. It's nice just to have that person that you can unload all that on and have conversations about. And I feel like we recharge each other. I think is a great way of putting it. I could be
mhm.
totally burnt out and feel like I'm not hearing anything new or exciting about reptiles, and then a good conversation with you, and I'm like, okay, so I need to read up on that species now, and I need to see what he was talking about, and then that makes me want to go take care of my animals a little bit better, and all it just kind of gets you right back down that rabbit hole of looking into things, and that's one of the really cool things about having good friendships, specifically in reptile keeping hobby. It is important. I know some people aren't super social, but it is an important aspect in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd have to say the last thing that's kind of kept me going and really kind of honed that interest in animals in general has to be my faith. I just think that they are living works of art and just something amazing to behold.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I hate to sound like a broken record of what got me into reptiles. I don't exactly have the most original story in the world. But you're here to listen to stories. If you're listening to this podcast, clearly you want to hear what I have to say, because I mean, I'm just such an awesome person, right? So my sort of background is when I was a little kid, I loved all animals. I loved bugs, I loved mammals, I loved birds, I loved all sorts of stuff. And I stumbled across this TV show called The Crocodile Hunter. Most of you probably never heard of it before. Very, nuanced and niche show. But I loved The Crocodile Hunter. Was a huge fan of that as a kid, and just got to see like the passion that Steve Irwin had, and that's what really got me is like seeing how he interacted with these animals that so many people were afraid of. Like people see snakes and they run away in fear and they freak out. He sees one and he screams with the excitement and is leaping towards it to try and catch it, even snakes that could be potentially deadly. Not that I'm necessarily endorsing leaping towards deadly snakes, especially if you don't know what you're doing, but just seeing that passion as a kid, it was infectious. And I know some people have the kind of the adverse effect of they liked other people in the media just because they weren't quite the sensationalist that Steve Irwin was. And he definitely did sensationalize thing. And I think we all can agree some episodes were scripted for sure, and not every catch was authentic, but the impact still is true. Like what happened and the effect from that show did carry on a legacy. I think some people have taken that to the extreme, and you get some people on media who are not very popular, who do some things that a lot of people don't like. But you also get those people who've taken that and they've channeled it into doing things that are good, working in conservation and treating animals with respect, and really carrying along the message that Steve Irwin was trying to portray with this show. So that was a really big inspiration to me when I was young. But just keeping going after that was the difficult part. I think I've been very in and out of reptiles throughout my most of my life. After about 10 years old, I kind of got out of reptiles for a couple of years. I thought they were neat, but I didn't really do anything with them or didn't really read up on them or anything like that. And then around 13 years old, I started volunteering at a place called the Museum of Arts and Sciences in Macon, Georgia, and worked with some animals there. And after a couple of years, that's actually where I met Luke. At the time, I was receiving an award for Volunteer of the Year, I believe is what it was, and saw this, little scrawny, helpless kid who looked lost, and decided I'd take him under my wing, and we've been best friends ever since, right?
It was something like that.
Yeah, somewhere along those lines. Definitely a little bit more of a Luke teaching me the ins and outs of reptiles. It was a I was I was working there. I enjoyed my volunteer job, but the wealth of knowledge that Luke had and was able to present to me was something that I'd never experienced. A lot of people talk about having mentors and people who help them grow in the reptile hobby and things like that. To that point, I had never had anyone like that. And when me and Luke first met, we weren't like immediately like best friends ever. We worked together and we hung out a little bit and things like that. But throughout high school, I was not really big into reptiles. Just did my job at the museum, and that was about it. And it was really after high school that me and Luke got really big into hanging out and looking into reptiles. And you were already pretty big into it because you and your dad did a lot of stuff looking for reptiles, right? I mean, y'all. Why don't you share a little bit of what you and your dad were always up to with field herping and stuff like that?
We did a lot back then, but before I want to mention that, I of course want to say, that road goes both ways. You've presented me with so many opportunities. I mean, for example, this podcast, most namely, is not something I would have thought up on my own or done on my own. So, that it's definitely a two-way street there. But we did
Well,
a
I do
lot,
appreciate it.
of course. Yeah, we did a lot, from looking for snakes and turtles when I was a kid to when we got a little older. We would start looking for, we got a lot more into it, looking for, especially the snakes, I think got his interest a lot more. I'll be honest, I'm more of a turtle nerd. I love common snapping turtles. I think they might be my favorite animal on the earth, but snakes they're a close second. They're cool.
Over time, I'd say the common snap turtle's growing on me. When you first told me that, I was like, okay, that's nuts. Like, whose favorite turtle is a common snapping turtle? They're pretty sweet. The more time I've spent with them and the more I've looked at them, you're kind of right. I mean, they're pretty cool.
They are pretty cool. But aside from that, again, kind of banking on the snakes at the time, my dad and I, we were volunteering at a organization called Southeastern Reptile Rescue. And that presented us with a lot of opportunities working with a lot of different types of animals. We also got to learn a lot about herping, going to look for reptiles. And that's what mainly, I think, got us into, not only got us some experience with venomous snakes, but got us into the road cruising aspect of that. Now, talking like a broken record, like I said, my favorite venomous snake native to Georgia is the copperhead, which I know a lot of people might laugh at. I just think they're the best. But
unsung heroes, that's who you like.
The unsung heroes, maybe so. But we were fortunate enough to actually live pretty close to a road that had a lot of copperheads on it. We would occasionally, go to different areas, different habitats, looking for different species of snakes, different target species in mind. But I think we called its nickname, we called it Copperhead Road, as a little Easter egg to the song, was that was a big player in that. We had some pretty good times out there, just you and I.
Oh, absolutely. See, I remember the very first time I went road cruising with you guys, I don't believe to that point I had ever seen a copperhead in person. And I lived in Central Georgia. Central Georgia is not exactly like hard to find copperheads. This just speaks to how inexperienced I was with herping and things like that. I had no venomous snake experience, nothing like that. And you and your dad were like, hey, you want to come road cruising with us and go looking for copperheads? And my first thought was, absolutely. Like, that sounds awesome. What on earth is road cruising? Like, what are we going to do? And you're like, yeah, we're going to ride up and down the road and look for snakes. I'm like, well, that's not how you find snakes. You find snakes out in the woods flipping logs and stuff like, what are you talking about? That's how you find snakes. It blew my mind. It was one of those things that was the first time that I had really gotten a peek into what actually looking for reptiles and successfully finding them was like. To my experience from then on, or before then, my experience was like, I find like 2 snakes a year. I would just look in the woods by my house, and if I was lucky, I'd find a black racer, or I somehow magically stumbled upon an eastern diamondback as a little kid. Like, it's just, that was the extent, the maximum for me. And y'all were like, yeah, if we're having a good night, we'll find 4 or 5 snakes. I'm like, 4 or 5? That's 2 years quota right there. It just blew my mind. And road cruising, I think me and you have a nearly infinite supply of funny stories that I'm sure will come up as time goes on. But that first night does really heavily live in my head, because y'all were talking about copperheads, and we did end up finding a copperhead that night. And it just blew my mind getting to see one of those things in person. Just so cool. So a really, really unique experience, getting to see that animal. And I think that was really the point in which I got hooked. Was we did that,
I see what you did there. I see what you did there with the copperhead.
Got hooked with a snake hook, which we've definitely not mistreated each other with snake hooks before and hooked each other. But that's beside the point. But those stories and those events were, I think, the things that really, really kept me going after getting into reptiles, and really started the snowball effect of what it is now. So just can't express how appreciative I am for those times and the memories that we were able to make from those trips. And I think that ties us pretty well into our next point, which is, the highlights of working with reptiles. I know I've got lots of stories, but I'd rather hear some of your highlights of working with, whether it be in the field or professionally or unprofessionally, whatever you want to say. So,
well, I'd say a big highlight for me, especially while we're talking about herping, I think is after I just got done bragging about rattlesnakes, copperheads. What I meant to say was anytime I get to see a rattlesnake outside, they're not a common animal around where I live. And so, I mean, it's just something that it's not like the copperhead where we could choose any night of the week. Hey, we've got 2 hours to kill. Let's go drive down the road and go see if there's any copperheads crossing.
Yeah,
It was something we had to put hours upon hours upon hours into.
Months
Sometimes living in central Georgia.
Yeah.
It was pretty highly populated with people and less populated with rattlesnakes. And so anytime we saw a timber rattlesnake living up there, it was a real treat there. For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I can think back to a lot of stories, particularly, I mean, if we're talking about rattlesnakes, I have to say stick down that path for a moment, because it took me forever to find my first rattlesnake. I mean, it was genuinely, well, sorry, I should go back. Funny enough, my first rattlesnake I ever saw was an eastern diamondback rattlesnake. I saw it when I was probably about 7 years old in Valdosta, Georgia with my grandparents, just crawling in the backyard. And, my family's all freaking out and they're like, do we need to call pest control? All that stuff. But just seeing that was really neat to me. I had no idea what it was. And being a little kid, while I did love reptiles, I definitely had a nightmare about a rattlesnake biting in my sleep that night. I just didn't have full appreciation of the moment. And then about when I was like 11 years old, the woods right behind my house, I somehow magically stumbled across an eastern diamondback back there. Never saw another one again. That's the last one I've ever seen. But I stumbled across that one, and I just remember that was the moment to me of being like, wow, that is an impressive, and beautiful animal. And then I didn't see another rattlesnake for almost 10 years after that. The next one we saw was my personal favorite snake in the state of Georgia. Or I'd say least venomous. I don't know if I'd say favorite in the state of Georgia totally, but the dusky pygmy rattlesnake. I love pygmy rattlesnakes, and we had made it a goal to find one of those for a while. And I remember riding down near Okefenokee Swamp. Me, you, and your dad are road cruising, and we're trying to get to the spot to go road cruising. And while we're riding on the road, probably like 40 miles per hour, I see this little tiny crack in the road that it's raised up a little bit, and you can see the head sticking up and the tail sticking up. And I remember going, oh, there's a snake. It doesn't look like anything I've seen before. I think it might be a pygmy rattlesnake. And your dad kind of being like, no, there's nothing there. And I don't know if you were looking when I spotted it. And I just remember getting out of the car and seeing that little like 6-inch long pygmy rattlesnake and just falling to my knees and tears coming to my eyes because I finally got to see another rattlesnake. And it was just such a neat thing seeing that little tiny rattlesnake in the middle of the road, and having that experience was just really special. And we found a few other rattlesnakes. You found quote unquote my lifer timber rattlesnake. It wasn't necessarily mine. I technically, to this day, I don't think I've ever spotted a timber rattlesnake. Now
I can think of one.
You can think of one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you tell me, because I don't remember this timber rattlesnake that I spotted.
Well, it was right after the timber rattlesnake you didn't spot. It was just later in the day.
Oh yeah, I guess.
So
Yeah, I'm thinking we saw that one at the same time, so I guess I wasn't taking credit for it.
Yeah, so that one, I don't know, which story do we want to get into first with those?
So I said we just start from the beginning of that day.
That was a pretty big highlight.
Yeah, that was a long day.
So to start it off, we were hiking at this park near central Georgia. And there's this trail that goes through this park that we walked down many, many times, found lots of different snakes and various other animals on. Most commonly, I feel like banded water, I think it was Cypodon, the northern water snake there, wasn't it?
I think it was Midland.
It was Midland, yeah.
Yeah, Midland.
So you've got your Midland water snakes, you've got your cottonmouths, and down that trail, sometimes some ribbon snakes and things like that, eastern king snakes, black rat snakes, but
great place. I think all total we found like 15 species.
Oh yeah, if at least. But down this particular trail, those were the two that reigned supreme: the water snakes and the cottonmouths. Mm-hmm. And we're walking down this trail. It's elevated gravel trail with swamp on both sides, and in this particular section, river cane growing on both sides, and a creek that cuts through, and a bridge you walk over. And you're checking the right side of the bridge. I'm checking the left side, and right there, up on the bank, there's a little, maybe size of a baseball, baby common snapping turtle. And I was like, Channing, you got to come see this. There's a baby snapping turtle over here. And he goes, looks down. It's maybe 5 feet at the most below the bridge. He was like, oh, that's really cool, and keeps on walking. I was like, now hold on a minute. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, they're my favorite animal. So I said, I'm worried you misheard me. What I'm worried you just heard was, come look at this baby snapping turtle. What I was trying to say was, grab my legs. We're about to dangle me down. I'm about to grab this thing.
And just for context, there is quite the size difference between me and Luke. I stand at about 6'5" and about 300 pounds. I'm a pretty large guy. And Luke, what would you say you were standing at the time?
I'm about 5'9", and at the time I was maybe about 120 pounds. I'm not that I've put on much. I'm maybe 130 now.
Yeah, so quite a big difference there.
Yeah, I think my sister actually put the comparison the best. She said that we looked like the rats from Flushed Away.
Yeah, yeah, the inescapable comparison right there. Dang it if it isn't so accurate. So yeah, if you want a good representation, just Google the rats from Flushed Away, and that's pretty close.
It's pretty close. So he grabs my ankles and like a claw machine starts lowering me down to grab this little baby snapping turtle. And I'm reaching my hand, I say above my head, I guess upside down, inverted, it's below my head. And I'm getting really close, and I see a little flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. And turn around, this flicker of movement happens to be a tongue flicking out of the mouth of a cottonmouth, and about a 3-foot long cottonmouth of that. So I start freaking out, tapping him on the hand, going, pull me up, pull me up, pull me up. And he goes, why? I was like, there's a cottonmouth down here. So he picks me up, and in fairness, it was probably 4 to 5 feet away from me. When I was dangling upside down, I thought it was a lot closer than that.
Yeah. Definitely your reaction, I thought that thing was like right in your face.
Well, I did too at the time.
Yeah, which I guess is fair when you're upside down. You have no control of where your body is.
So that was a great highlight to that morning. We ended up finding a lot of snakes that morning. It got really hot. Yeah. I think it was in the low 90s. We go back to my car, and my car keys are sitting in the seat, and the doors are locked, and I've forgotten them in there.
Yeah.
So we decide... We call my dad to come bring a spare key from the house. And we start just killing time walking down this game trail up near these railroad tracks. And you're like you said, you're a tall man. You take some long strides there.
I do. I take some real long strides. I've been compared to Bigfoot often. I have a similar gait.
So I wasn't too concerned when I saw just a little, maybe about an inch long section of a little timber rattlesnake in the middle of your stride there, in between both legs there. And at first I thought this is a little baby timber rattlesnake, much like that pygmy rattlesnake in size, about 6 inches long. So I'm like, oh my gosh. And I see a little bit more of this timber rattlesnake that's buried down the leaves. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I see a little bit more of this timber rattlesnake a little, further along the trail. I'm like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, you almost died.
Yeah. Which, I mean, like, in hindsight, probably not death, but when you pointed it out to me, it genuinely felt like I had just dodged a missile. Like, yeah, it was one of those things, because I looked down and I didn't see it at first, but I had stepped, and I have a picture of my footprint about an inch in front of this, what would you say, 4.5, 5 foot timber rattlesnake?
I'd say about 4.5, yeah.
Yeah, it's a decent sized timber rattlesnake, pretty big.
It was not small.
No, and I stepped like an inch in front of its face, and I pride myself on my ability to spot snakes. I can't say that I should say I used to pride myself on it. I can't say that I do anymore. That humbled me quite a bit. Stepping right over that thing and just having no idea it was there. It just blew my mind. And the fact that the timber rattlesnake was respectful and kind enough to not bite me, even though it totally would have been justified in doing so with me getting that close and up in its business. I couldn't have been mad at the animal at all for doing it if it defended itself, but yeah, not my best moment in the world. So,
but it's hard to fault you for it. I mean, it's not like it was just laid out across this game trail. It was coiled up in an ambush position and had like leaves even like on top of it. Like it had burrowed down almost like one of those sidewinders down into
it was pretty well camouflaged, but definitely a reminder that I need to be a little more careful about watching where my hands and feet go while moving around on those trails out there.
It was,
and the funny thing was, well, at that point, it was kind of an even. You had almost, not literally, but you had almost died once, and I had almost died once, and so we figured we needed to have a tiebreaker and go do something else stupid that day. Or not necessarily stupid, something that was normal for me and you. But
I seem to remember thinking this would be relaxing. We
we
left the park, had lunch, hung out that day, had dinner. Around sunset, we're like, hey, it's probably a good time to go fishing. Let's go relax a little, do some fishing in this local swamp in the area. And in fairness, we did have a really good night fishing.
Yeah, great time. I think this is one of the few times that you like royally outfished me. Like you caught significantly more than me. It might be, but you definitely outfished me that night.
But yeah, speaking of that night, we didn't keep fishing there, did we?
No, we definitely didn't, because I remember we were sitting there and it was getting dark, and it was getting to the point where we were switching from any type of lure fishing to, trying to just catch some catfish or whatever like that. And I remember there was this big berm to the left of us. And I looked at you and I was like, Luke, I feel like I heard a rustling sound over there on that berm. And the second that sentence came out of my mouth, no idea what it was, but some giant black mass that was probably either a big hog or black bear just jumped off the berm into the water and started sprinting towards us. In my mind, this was a chupacabra, something crazy, like it totally blew my mind, because I'm like, I hear this light rustling and this gigantic 100+ pound creature jumps off into the water right next to us, starts coming after us. We book it back to the car, which luckily was only like 10 feet behind us, so we were able to get back to it pretty quick, get in there, and never saw what that thing was to this day. I kind of wish we would have, just to give a little bit more closure to the story, but just never saw what this mass was that jumped to the water. And we had decided at that point, okay, we're leaving. Like we've tempted fate enough today. We're getting out of here. And on the way back, we're riding down the road, and we had gone, back up this road, and there wasn't a storm or any wind or anything like that. But on the way back, there was this huge tree limb that was covering up like over half this road. And, we're like, of course, we're going to have to, get out of the car and move this tree limb immediately after getting chased out of the swamp by something. That's great. But it was not a tree limb. Funny enough, as we got closer, we realized that tree limb, similar to the pygmy rattlesnake we discussed earlier, had its head up off the ground and its tail up off the ground, giving us the signature of a rattlesnake. And as we got closer, we realized that was the biggest timber rattlesnake I have ever seen in my life. Don't know if I will ever see a diamondback this big, hopefully, but blew my mind. And so we pull up, I'm getting the car situated, and Luke, you jumped out first. So why don't you explain what was going through your brain after you jumped out of the car?
Well, I was just very excited. I mean, this was a pushing 6-foot timber rattlesnake. I mean, when we first, saw it, like you said, I thought, man, this branch has fallen in the road. And then the branch started moving. And I was like, someone has dumped a Burmese python out here.
Yeah.
And I mean, a couple hours ago, we had just found the biggest timber rattlesnake I'd ever seen at about 4.5 feet long.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, get a little bit closer to it in the car and realize that what I thought was a red-tailed boa or Burmese python someone had dumped out in the swamp had a rattle on it. And so I grabbed the snake hook, jump out of the car, and realized the only snake hook I had at the time was about 2 feet long. And so
little short for a big
and
snake.
So there's been few times I felt as, I guess, humbled by an animal in that way. That I was like, nope, there's no good way to catch this. There's no good way.
And I remember jumping out of the car behind you and walking up to it, and I don't have a snake hook. You've got your little 2-foot snake hook, and we just had that moment of looking at the rattlesnake, making eye contact with each other. And we both just kind of shook our heads, and we were like, I don't feel comfortable touching this thing. So we just kind of watched it crawl off the road and decided that, after the long day we had and the short snake hook that we had at the moment, the best thing to do was just to completely leave that thing alone and let it pass at its own pace. And it did do that. And, at that point we rode off into the sunset and let a wild day come to a close. Just crazy day. We've had lots of days that were similar events to like any one of those stories, but I do think that day was probably the craziest string of events. But yeah, I mean, that's cool stories, and hopefully we'll get the opportunity to share some more stories kind of as time goes on, but I don't want to bog down too much with all those or use up all of our good stuff too early on. But great times, and enjoy reminiscing those stories with you. But one thing that I did want to talk to you about, Luke, and just kind of ask you is, we've talked about things that got us passionate with reptiles, but what is something that drives your passion? Like when you wake up in the morning and you decide you want to keep going in herpetoculture or in your career, what is exactly that pushes you forward in that?
A big one for me is seeing the animals that I get to work with out in the wild. Of course, we have a lot of native snakes over at the nature center. So anytime I
Yeah.
get to see one of those that we also happen to have in captivity doing its thing outside is a really, I guess, rejuvenating moment. It's also kind of what I've based the snakes that I have at home. Some of my favorite snakes that live here in Georgia. I don't know if how many people will be familiar with the laws in Georgia, but all of your native non-venomous snakes are protected, which is great, but it also means that you cannot keep them without a permit. So instead of black rat snakes or yellow rat snakes or gray rat snakes, I have Japanese rat snakes instead of an Eastern indigo. Obviously, I've got some Mexican indigo snakes, and so they're they're really just fun to keep, and just that's a big thing that keeps me going. Probably the biggest one though is these educational programs that you and I have grown up doing for public at
Yeah.
various different jobs.
I agree with
And
that 100%.
there's just, I feel like nothing more special than I love having, and I know this can be a controversial topic on occasion, but I love just having as much interaction as possible. Well, as safely possible in these programs. Let me preface that. But I mean, there's just, to me, it's just, it all can get summed up when you pick, everybody raise their hand if they want to come help hold this next animal, and you pick a random kid in the audience to come up and hold it, and it'll be, a little Eastern king snake or black rat snake, something like that, and you hand that snake to that kid, and maybe they've never touched a snake before, maybe they've never even seen a snake before, and this is their first experience with it. There's almost like a light that flicks on behind those eyes, and then not only do they get to be a part of that program, but every child that comes up and gets to pet this animal in this program, they tend to have the exact same reaction. And so I think that's probably the most inspiring thing that keeps me going, is just inspiring that passion in others, especially the next generation of maybe reptile keepers there.
And I'm glad you said that, because that wasn't going to be my point. But I do very, very strongly agree with what you said. Just having that opportunity to put your own, pride aside, or whatever it may be, and just spend that time with the younger generation, the people who are going to be doing what we're doing next, and getting to, pour into them and respect them and answer their questions and treat them like they do matter, because they do. Having that opportunity to conversate with them and really get to know them and be a good influence on reptiles to them is something that is an awesome feeling. When you get to see that kid who's apprehensive, like you said, to touch a snake, and then by the end of it, they're like, "Mom, can I get a pet snake?" And, seeing that is like, okay, we got another one. That's another one on Team Snake or on Team Reptile. And so just really, really cool, and a very touching experience. It definitely makes you feel good about being in a career, especially a career that, you don't ever really plan to get rich in. So kind of having that fuel is really nice. I'd say for me, though, personally, what drives my passion is just natural history is a really big deal for me. And working with snakes that I've been able to find in the wild, at least in my private collection, is something that's always been very touching to me. Obviously I've never found Western hognose snakes, but I found some Eastern hognose snakes down in Georgia, and so I've got some Western hognose snakes in my collection, and they kind of remind me of those. But also, my first ever pet snake was a Western hognose, so I've got some more of them for that reason. I grew up catching Eastern king snakes, and for the same reason, like you said, with not being able to own Eastern king snakes in Georgia, when I moved up to Kentucky, that was one of those species that I was immediately like, I've got to get some of these one day. So I picked up a pair of Eastern king snakes from Metazotics last year for Christmas, and absolutely love those guys. And then also just working with species that are less common or underappreciated is something that I'm very passionate about. My snake that I have the most of in my collection is the Clifford's diadem rat snakes, the Egyptian rat snakes, and they're a $25 to $50 import snake that comes in bulk, and nobody really gives them the time of day. And I just remember getting some of those because they were inexpensive, and a neat looking snake, knew very little about them, and just kind of taking care of them, and now being able to produce eggs in my second clutch this year, with those snakes, being able to captive breed them. Just things like that are really what drives my passion, and keeps me excited in the hobby specifically. But I mean, when we look at the hobby now, I think one of the biggest things, and we're about to get into our last question, is just like things change significantly over time as far as your perspective. And I think that's something that's important to touch on, and we want to ask a lot of people about those. That is our last question, and me and Luke agreed not to share what our answer for this was ahead of time for the podcast. We wanted to not know at all what it was going to be. So I'm excited to ask you the question, Luke, and I can't wait to hear what your answer is. So our final question to ask each other is, what does success in herpetoculture mean to you now compared to when you started?
I'd say a big one for me is just keeping proper care of your animals there. If you're just got a revolving door of snakes coming in and out of the house, and maybe they make it, maybe they don't. That's probably not success in herpetoculture there.
Yeah.
But just proper care, whatever form that takes on in your facility, I think is a big one. For me personally, I've got my, like I said, pair of Japanese rat snakes, pair of Mexican indigos, and they're expensive to feed, especially those indigo snakes. I guess anything in Drymarchon, they can eat. They can eat a lot. And so for me, one day I would like to be able to breed those pairs of snakes and just have that little, hobby at home be financially self-sufficient would be a goal I'm certainly reaching for. Just personally.
Yeah, that's awesome. For me, my goal has definitely changed over time. If I take a look back at like what my goal was when I first got big into reptiles as a kid, my goal was, I was like, I want to be a ball python and crested gecko, leopard gecko, and bearded dragon breeder. That's when I've made it, is when I breed all those animals. And it's just funny looking back at it now. I feel slightly different about most of those animals. Not to hate on any of them, but those definitely are not my cup of tea per se. I do love bearded dragons still, but not one that I plan on owning myself. Just appreciate them for what they are. So success has definitely changed a lot now. And I think one of those things that is really important to me, and I try and say it without sounding arrogant, is I want to leave behind a legacy with herpetoculture, and not necessarily have my name in books or whatever it may be. But, I've got a son who's due to be born, sometime within probably a month from now. And with him coming along, it's kind of changed my outlook. Is I want him to be able to look back and be like, yeah, I know about this animal because of the work my dad did, or that animal is more common in herpetoculture because my dad was able to put in the work and breed that animal, and just trying to do good in the hobby so that if he loves it, which I don't know if he will, but if he's interested in it and if he likes it, that he will have that opportunity to enjoy it and hopefully reap benefits from work that I'm putting in now. And that's a tall task. Not sure if I'll make it to where I'm ever able to do anything impactful enough for that. But that is something that I'm hopeful for. So success for me now is just, one, taking care of the animals that I have, making sure my animals have their needs not just met but exceeded, that they're well cared for, and that my animals are appreciated. And also, being able to talk to other people, get to know other people in the hobby, and really being a social person in the hobby is something that I think is a big success. Being able to attend the 2 IHSs now, the International Herpetological Symposium. Hopefully we'll attend more in the future. Planning to attend my second Colubrid Fest this year, and just getting to meet those people and make those connections and stuff like that. I think that's more where the success lies in my brain now. So it's definitely shifted quite a bit, and I'm excited to see how that goes. And I'm hopeful that as this podcast goes on and as time goes on, that we'll be able to check off some of those boxes and accomplish some of these successes for ourselves. So those are some things that I find very important to me. But, we're getting to the end here, and I think to wrap it up, I'm going to absolutely steal something from the Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. The way they kind of end their podcast, I'm a huge fan of. I think it puts a bow on things really well. So, my question is, Luke, if people wanted to find you and reach out to you, where could they do that?
I guess I'm most active on Instagram under Central Georgia Reptiles. Would be the easiest way to do that.
Nice. And for me, you can find me on Instagram as well under Channing Guest. I do have 3 Instagram pages. One is Channing Guest Photography. I'm never on that. Another one is like a gym page I made a while back. You're definitely not going to reach me on that one. And then I have my normal page, which is Channing Guest. If you have questions or you want to chat with me about something, absolutely reach out to me on there. I love talking to people about all sorts of fun reptile stuff. So yeah, we thank you for checking out our very first episode of Scutes and Scales Podcast. The next episode we will be releasing will be 2 weeks from the release date of this episode. And that episode will be about man-eating snakes, and it will be a Legends series. So if you are interested in that, please subscribe to this YouTube channel, and we may be publishing on other platforms later on, but for now we're going to stick to just YouTube and be looking out for a notification of that publication right there. So we thank you for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of your day, whether it be morning, evening, or night. Thank you.